Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Many of us have been waiting to see which way South Africa was going to go. And the decision has finally been made. ANC is going to form a coalition government with the Democratic Alliance. This is a historical moment for South Africa. Some people do not fully appreciate the importance of this moment. The truth of the matter is, South Africa has been going the wrong way the last 30 years, since 1994. There is no denying that the last 30 years have seen South Africa, which was one of the most robust and promising economies in Africa, fall behind. South Africa, many people have been saying that it has been slowly but surely becoming yet another failed African state because of gross mismanagement and rampant corruption the last 30 years. Many people would have never believed that South Africa would be facing the same teething problems as other African countries like Zimbabwe, of load shedding, basic services becoming slowly substandard. But that is exactly where South Africa was going. And thank God, the late iconic leader Nelson Mandela left that country with a healthy and functioning democratic system of government, where the people still had a say in the governance of the country. ANC thought, as the party that spearheaded the end of apartheid, like other African countries, African liberation movements, they had the divine right to rule. The people of South Africa decided that was not the case. In the 29th May 2024 elections, ANC lost its majority in parliament and was forced to form a coalition. The party had the opportunity to form a coalition with other parties, like former President Zuma's MK or Julius Malema's EFF. That would have taken them over the 50% of the seats. But that would not have solved ANC's problem of gross mismanagement, of rampant corruption that has dogged that nation the last 30 years. There are some people, of course, who would argue that the Democratic Alliance, although it has got blacks in it, is still predominantly a white political party. And this is like going back to apartheid rule. The truth is that is not the case. The Democratic Alliance will bring into this coalition something that ANC didn't have, that the country desperately needed: good governance and an end to corruption. Let's just listen to Sky News' announcement of this coalition.
In power. Just a reminder attention to South Africa now, where the Democratic Alliance says that a deal has been signed for the party to join a unity government with the African National Congress. The ANC, which was once the party of Nelson Mandela, of course, it lost its 30-year majority in a historic election 2 weeks ago. It means that it needs the backing of the other parties to stay in power. Just a reminder of how things dropped out. The ANC won 40% of the vote, the largest share, making it still the biggest party. The Democratic Alliance Party holds the second largest share with 21%. Well, our Africa correspondent, Yusra Elbagir, can speak to us now. Does this still mean a Ramaposa presidency, Yusra?
Sam, Ramaposa is expected to be re-elected in Parliament today in their first sitting as the 7th National Assembly in South Africa's democratic history. The ANC still have the largest number of MPs in the National Assembly. They've got 159. And when it comes to voting in a president, you just need the largest number. You just need the majority of votes. It is a secret ballot, though. So the talks that have been happening behind the scenes have been critical for the ANC to establish that there won't be enough fragmentation or fractures within the party that could undermine this ballot. Over the last week of coalition talks, that partnership that you mentioned between the DA and the ANC has been a real point of contention, of controversy. Opposition parties, the fourth largest party, the EFF, has led a group of 7 opposition parties who have come out against the ANC teaming up with the Democratic Alliance. And just for some background, it's a white-led centrist party. It's business-oriented. They are proposing to loosen labor laws, to do away with affirmative action policies that came in after the end of apartheid. And though it is a mixed party with Black politicians, it is seen as a white-led party. And that has really been an issue within the ranks of the ANC, who are worried that they're going to lose their struggle credentials as the party that liberated the country from white minority rule.
Well, I'll stop it there. The issue of losing your liberation credentials has been a big issue. And in many other countries, including Zimbabwe, that has been a big debating issue. But I would like to remind the listeners that this is not about keeping one's liberation credentials. This is about what is good for the country. And I think South Africans, when push came to shove, realized that retaining ANC just for the sake of liberation credentials at the expense of the country becoming yet another failed state. There was no choice there. They wanted South Africa to prosper for the good of the country. The Chinese leader who changed China for the better to become what it is today famously said The color of the cat is not important, whether it's black or white, as long as it catches mice. This was a turning point in China. After decades of communist rule, gross mismanagement, and so forth, he was the one who changed China to be the modern China we know today. I think South Africa has made that important decision as well. Or at least them ordinary people, ordinary South Africans made that decision when they voted on the 29th of May and denied ANC the absolute majority, forcing ANC to go into a coalition. And I'm glad to see that the ANC leaders have been pragmatic enough to see that what they needed was a partner who will address the weaknesses in South Africa today: bad governance, gross mismanagement, and rampant corruption. Julius Malema and Jacob Zuma would have never brought those credentials. If anything at all, I think South Africa would have continued in its decline if they had chosen those as their partners. It is important that we come to Zimbabwe because Zimbabwe followed the same route. By the late 1990s, the people of Zimbabwe came to the realization that Zimbabwe was in decline. They also came to the realization that as long as Zanu PF remained in power, that decline will continue. They came to the consensus decision that they needed democratic changes in the country to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections and restore the ordinary Zimbabweans' right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. This is what all this democratic change was all about. Morgan Tsvangirai and his friends launched their party in 1999, riding on the wave of the popular sentiment, the call for democratic change. And they named their party accordingly, the Movement for Democratic Change. The tragedy for Zimbabwe, of course, is although the people went on to risk life and limb and livelihoods to elect Morgan Tsvangirai and company into power on the understanding that they will deliver those democratic change. Alas, that was never to happen. As we know, MDC did get into power. The GNU of 2008 to 2018, it presented the golden opportunity for MDC to implement those reforms and end the dictatorship. Alas, we were not that lucky. Robert Mugabe bribed Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends with the trappings of high office. And, yep, they forgot about the reforms. Not even one token reform was implemented during the GNU. Where's still post-GNU MDC leaders, Triple C leaders, have been participating in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that Zanu PF was rigging the elections, knowing fully well that by participating, they were helping to give the Zanu PF legitimacy. And yet, they stubbornly continue to participate out of greed. Here is a quotation from David Coulter's book. I have referred to it again and again, but it is important. It is important that Zimbabweans should be reminded of that, because it happened. These people knew that Zanu PF was rigging these elections, but they've continued to participate out of greed. Last year, the 2023 elections, Chamisa was so hell-bent on participating in those flawed elections that he came out with a blatant lie that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Triple C was going to win big. And unfortunately, millions of Zimbabweans out there believed him, gullible enough to believe him. And they participated. And by participating, you gave the Zanu PF legitimacy. And SADC, I believe SADC, whose election observer were not fooled at all. For the first time, the election observers were clear that Zimbabwe's 2023 elections were flawed and illegal. And they said so in their report. But there were other SADC leaders who were determined to make sure that Zanu PF remained in power, notably South Africa. ANC in their November 2022 party congress came up with a party resolution that they would never allow regime change in Zimbabwe. Shocking resolution. Zimbabwe is not a province of South Africa. So what business did the ANC have in saying they would not allow regime change in Zimbabwe? I thought it was the ordinary Zimbabweans who had the meaningful say in the governance of the country. And in the final say, who rules the country? But alas, in South Africa, we had a neighbor who believed they had the final say, regardless of the reality on the ground. Of course, the ANC knew that Zimbabwe, Zanu PF, intended to rig the 2023 elections. And the message they were sending with that party resolution was very clear. Zanu PF, you can go ahead and rig the elections. We will support you. We will not allow regime change in Zimbabwe. Well, I think the bloody nose ANC received on the 29th of May have sent a clear message to ANC yes, as much as South Africans were focusing on domestic issues, but I think they did the people of Zimbabwe a great favor. Because boisterous ANC came up with a resolution that they would not permit regime change in Zimbabwe. But ANC that has had its wings clipped after the 29th May election will never say such a stupid thing ever again. At least not in the next 5 years. So this coalition with DA, a more pragmatic political team, which definitely would not allow or would not look kindly to ANC interfering in Zimbabwe's affairs. Indeed, we expect this coalition, the ANC-DA coalition, to be actively interested in saying Zimbabwe becoming a democratic nation. As much as they would not be the one to interfere, they will still nonetheless would not be actively undermining democratic processes in Zimbabwe. And so this coalition has Zanu PF worried sick because they know that as much as they've counted on the ANC propping them up this last 20 years, they cannot do so anymore. An economically recovering South Africa would be good for the SADC, the whole SADC region, if not Africa as a whole. But the people of Zimbabwe have even more reason to celebrate this coalition. It will stop ANC interfering in Zimbabwe's internal affairs. It will stop ANC propping up this Zanu PF dictatorship. That is probably the most important thing for Zimbabwe right now. And I think the people of Zimbabwe should celebrate that. Yes, there will be some Zimbabwean, as much as South Africans, will be vexed that DA is, yes, maybe a diluted, but nonetheless, has got the remnants of the apartheid regime. But I think this is a pragmatic move. As much as the white South Africans in the DA have connections with the apartheid regime, I don't see why they should be judged on what the apartheid rulers did. Judge them on their own performance. If they fail to deliver economic recovery in South Africa as a coalition, judge them on that. I believe South Africa's economy is going to recover. And I believe democracy, the fruits of a real healthy and functioning democracy are being reaped in South Africa as we speak. The people of South Africa, maybe without knowing it, we're being pragmatic. And I think ANC leaders have come to their senses and they've realized that recovering South Africa's economy was more important than being dogmatic. I refer to the quotation of the leader. It doesn't matter the color of the cat, whether it's white or black, as long as it kills mice. The DA-ANC coalition will stop the rot of bad governance, of the gross mismanagement, of the corruption. That cannot be bad for South Africa. That is what gives meaning to life. Better life for everybody. There are those who want to put luxury of dogmatism, of pragmatism. But I think South Africans have realized that they are not interested in being dogmatic. And I think democracy has allowed them to come to that rational conclusion. I hope that this is a good day for Zimbabwe because it opens the opportunity for Zimbabwe to really start focusing on the issue of good governance without having to look behind at who else is propping up Zanu PF. There is no denying that the ANC has propped up Zanu PF the last 20 years at least. But thank God, we've turned over a new leaf. We've seen an end to ANC propping up Zanu PF. And that cannot be a bad thing for Zimbabwe. Thank you very much for joining me today, and have a good day.